Alright, so today we're gonna do a tier list for all the rings and no rest for the wicked. First up, let's talk about the categories that we're gonna be putting the rings into, starting off with broken. This category is going to be for the rings that are very impactful, and to some degree, how good the rings are in this category are going to be influenced by the best builds in the game. For the next one, we have solid, which is the rings that are really good, but there are just a few things that are holding them back from being broken. The next one is going to be the decent category, and the rings for this one are of course going to be decent, but you're going to have better options, particularly from the higher tiers. And then the next one is going to be for the rings that are not necessarily good for a lot of builds, but you can still find value depending on how you set them up. And for the last one, it's going to be for the rings that are not going to help you in combat whatsoever. Starting off this tier list, we have the agility ring. This one is currently bugged and you don't actually get any benefits from the speed buff, but if it actually works as intended, especially after the early access patch number 1, then this is going to be one of the best rings, especially for stamina focused builds. So if you have 3 or even just 2 of them equipped, then you're going to have insanely high mobility and just overall better efficiency on your attacks. And so assuming that this item actually works as intended, then I'm actually going to put this on the solid tier. Next up, we have the Band of Calmness, which is a really good ring, even after the big nerf on focus oriented builds. The plus 100 focus is huge because that means that you don't have to spend any points in your focus stat, and on top of that, you're also getting additional focus gain, which I've actually seen other people get a ring with upwards of 30%. The Band of Calmness is simply a very powerful ring even after the nerf to focus builds, and I think that focus oriented builds are still the meta in this game, so because of that, I'm putting this on the broken tier. Next up we have the Crow Ring, and this one is kind of like the definition of a niche item, because yes, getting a ton of HP when dealing damage is really good, especially considering that you can stack this item up to 3 times, and you might even have another health on damage dealt on your weapon. But the only problem is that the amount of HP that you're losing is actually insane, especially if you don't have a crazy amount of points invested into HP. You can still use the Crow Ring when you're farming mobs in the open world, but when it comes to major bosses like the Echo Knight, then you're probably not going to get any value from this. Next up we have the Feather Ring, and this one is another niche item, but this is probably something that you're never going to use, not unless you really have to. The only reason why you're going to use this is if you don't have any points for increasing your equip load, and you need to hit a certain weight for your specific armor setup. Generally speaking, it's better to spend a few points on equip load, or at least get weight decrease on your equipment, instead of using the Feather Ring. The other rings in the game are going to give you more value, so you're better off using that. For the next one, we have the Fierce Ring, and this one is basically a better version of the Stone Tusk Ring. It's going to increase your damage on top of giving you additional armor, so it's overall a really good item, and that's why I'm putting this on the solid tier. And then next up, we have the Golden Band, and this one is going to be a very niche item, just because you're only going to use this before you hit max level. But even then, it doesn't actually take long to level up in this game, so I would imagine that you're better off using a different one that actually improves your character in combat. For the next one, we have the Jade Ring, and this one actually got more value ever since they started leaning more towards stamina focused builds. With that being said, the Jade Ring is still not the best ring for stamina focused builds, simply because you can get the stamina refill chance on damage dealt. So if you have a weapon like the Needle Spear or the Siren Queen's Horn, then you're most likely not going to have any problems with your stamina. So because of that, I'm putting this on the decent tier. Next up, we have the Plag Ring, and this one is actually very counterintuitive in terms of the meta that we have right now, because normally you would want to have really high focus generation so that you can spam your abilities, but this one is actually going to do the opposite and get rid of your focus. I can imagine this being viable in the normal attack focus build, but we're going to need a few more buffs to stamina builds before I can see that being a reality. So for now, I'm putting this at the bottom of the niche tier. Next up, we have the Ring of Broken Promises, and this one is actually the best ring in the game. Well, the best one out of all the rings with curses. You are going to get a huge damage increase from the Ring of Broken Promises, and the damage increase is actually better than the one that you can get from the Fierce Ring. I would recommend this item to the endgame players, and not so much for the early to mid game players, just because you need quite a bit of armor and HP to actually negate the curse from this item. You can also consider this to be a speedrun item, simply because you're not going to feel the negative effect effects if you know the enemy mechanics really well. So because of that, I'm putting this on the solid tier. Next up, we have the Rune Ring, and this one is quite possibly the best damage ring in the game. The current meta is essentially based on dealing damage using abilities, aka runes, so this item is basically a match made in heaven, especially because the additional damage from this is actually insane. You can find plenty of builds that work with this item, and considering the fact that focus builds are still meta, then this definitely deserves to be on the broken tier. Moving on, we have the Solace Ring, and I've honestly not seen anyone make this item work in a reasonable way. Also considering that the potions have no cooldown, and you're probably going to generate more focus doing normal attacks relative to blocking with this, then I don't really see why you would be using this ring. So because of that, I'm putting this at the very bottom. For the next one, we have the Stone Tusk Ring, which is a decent option in the early game when you don't really have many choices, but once you get a Fierce Ring, then there's really no reason to use this. I'm actually tempted to put this at the very bottom as well, but you can make an argument for using this when you're going for a crazy armor stack build. So I guess I will put this on the niche tier instead. Moving on, we have the Snake and Thistle Ring. I'm putting these two together because you're most likely going to use them in the same type of build. These are only useful for a damage reflection build, which is kind of good because you're basically winning by not doing anything, but outside of that, you're not really going to use the Snake or Thistle Ring. So because of that, I'm putting these two on the niche tier. Next up, we have the Willow Cap Ring, which is basically the inferior version of the Agility Ring. It increases the overall speed of your character, but you're actually missing out on the attack stamina cost decrease and the sprint stamina cost decrease that the Agility Ring provides. This might be useful for some sort of normal attack build, but I don't see why you would use this over the Agility Ring. So because of that, I'm putting this at the very bottom along with the Solace Ring. And then last but not the least, well, that's actually a lie because this one is literally the least useful ring in the game. And that is of course the Woven Ring. I've actually never had any problems with climbing in this game, even though I've never spent a single point on the stamina stat. So I'm probably never going to use this, and I would imagine the same for you. So yeah, that is basically my ratings for all the rings in No Rest for the Wicked. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below if you agree or disagree, and as always, definitely make sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.